And over to you, Andrea.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our author chat with Elena Hartwell Taylor. I didn't ask you how you want me to introduce you for your name, but
That is totally fine. I get a
I
little
think
confused myself.
most people here already know us, but I'm going to give you a quick intro. Well, I'm Andrea Karen Nelson. I'm the founder of Allegory Editing. And of course, Elena is also an integral part of our operation here, but she's here today as her author self. And just for posterity's sake, I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. Some of you may be surprised by some of these things.
I may be
Elena's
surprised.
well, no, this is your bio that you wrote, so you won't be surprised. But Elena Hartwell spent several years working in the theater as a playwright, director, designer, and educator before turning her storytelling skills to fiction. Her first series, the one that we're here to celebrate today, is The Eddie Shoes Mysteries, which introduced a quirky mother-daughter crime-fighting duo. As Elena Taylor, she returns to her dramatic roots and brings readers more serious and atmospheric books with the Sheriff Bet Rivers mysteries, starting with All We Buried. The series continues with A Cold, Cold World, launching August 6th. Located in her beloved Washington state, Elena uses her connection to the environment to produce a forbidding story of small town secrets and things that won't stay buried. Dun dun dun. I feel like out there. But today we are here because you are Eddie's back.
Yay, Eddie.
The Eddie Shoes series is relaunching. So congratulations on
Thanks.
that. I know it's been happening a little bit periodically over the year or over the last few months.
Mhm.
And tell me more. How that happened? How's it going? What's
Yeah.
with Eddie?
Yeah, that was a
Catch us
that
up.
yeah, that's been a complex process. So my Eddie Shoes series originally came out with a very small press, and I had artistic differences with them. And I left the press and managed to hang on to my rights. And I do want to clarify about that because sometimes people get a little confused. You never actually give your rights away. If you're an author and your books are published, you always own the rights. But what you have done is given a publishing company permission to be the only ones to produce it. All right. So basically, what I got back was they no longer had permission to produce it. I now owned both the copyright, which I always owned, and I now was the sole person who could put those books out. So what it meant was the ebooks disappeared and the print books disappeared unless people bought a used copy because there wasn't anybody putting them out anymore, which made me very sad. But it also meant that I now had control of them. So my agent and I had conversations about how we would like to have Eddie come back out, but it's really difficult to have a publisher want to put back out books that have already been published by another company. That's really challenging. You hear about it sometimes, self-pub people authors who get a publisher puts them out, but it's very hard when they've already been published by a press. So we weren't real optimistic, but we kept our ears open and thought about where they might go. There's a publishing house called Open Road Media, who is a fantastic company, and they have done wonderful things for what we call the backlist books that are out of print from authors. And also, they do some new books, but their primary role is they put out backlist books that are out of print and they republish projects like mine. So we went to Open Road Media and they were thrilled to take the series. New covers, which I love, 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 love my new covers. They're so bright and eye catching. And I also got to do some rewrites. I had diverged with my editor, especially on the third book. She made some decisions that I wasn't happy with. And I was able to write back in a subplot that I had been sort of forced to cut. And all of them are a little tighter. I'm a better writer than I was in 2015, 2014, when the Eddie Shoes were first starting to be written. So that's the story. So they came out in ebook. Open Road Media is primarily an ebook first publisher. They came out in ebook in September, and they came out in print this month, just a couple of days to go. And so they're back out in the world. And as I like to say, they're better than they were when they first came out. So it's exciting all around.
So even if you read them, it's worth checking out again. And
Definitely worth checking out again.
Um, so it sounds like it was my next question was how how has relaunching Eddie Shoes felt different than the initial launch? You've already talked about how the process was a little different
Yeah.
through some more rewrites and all that, but how has the
Yeah.
launch has relaunch felt different?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's simultaneously less exciting and more exciting. Like the to have your first book published is, it's your first, right? It's like your first kiss, your first love, your first sex, whatever. Your first, whatever that first is. And you can't ever have that again. So that was different. It didn't feel like a first book coming out. But it also, I have so much more confidence with this publisher. I'm so much more excited about the covers. I'm so much more engaged. Like the ebook sales are so much more important now in a lot of ways than they were in 2016. So having this really forward thinking, much bigger marketing, bigger market, and a lot of support. They're fantastic at doing ebook sales. Those of you who are ebook readers, watch out for sales. In fact, One Dead, Two to Go is on sale all month. So I love that sort of that support of wanting to have strong sales behind these books. So all of that is actually more exciting. Like and knowing what I know now, I understand what I'm getting I didn't get the first time around. And so having a different kind of support from my publisher is also like a different experience and more experience. So, like the covers better, I like the writing better, I like the support better. And I'm just so pleased to have them back out because it felt like, yeah, I've written those books, but they're not available. It didn't feel real. So having them back out, I'm like, oh yeah, I have 4 books out and one and a fifth coming out. And that just feels better, sort of psychologically.
Yeah. Well, and you had an agent this time. Did you have an agent when you did not when you published them the first time, right? So that had to have
Biggest
been different.
mistake I have made in my career. Hands down, the biggest mistake I made in my career was not going after an agent first.
You didn't
That is,
try for
I
those.
didn't even try. No, because I had I had sent it to this press and they gave me an offer for 3 books. And I thought, well, cool, this is going to be great. And there's some wonderful small presses out there. And I'm sure there are people who even were happy with the press that I was at. But for me, career author, right? I wasn't just looking to put out a single book. I'm looking to have a long-term career. Not having an agent at the beginning was the biggest mistake I made. One, I never would have signed with the company I signed with. I think this series probably would have gone to a much bigger press the first time around. And I certainly would have been protected. I wouldn't have had the issues that I had. And so that is hands down the and probably the only mistake I've made, knock on wood, to date, right? To date, only real mistake I've made in my career was that. Yeah.
And now, so you had that someone else backing you up, which made a big difference in how this process went. But then
Yeah.
you have a lot more experience under your belt just with the process of working with the editors and working with, working on all those elements. Did you feel that it was different for you and sort of your confidence level with how you approach them? And how did that make a difference in kind of that? Or I don't know if confidence is quite the right word, but
Yeah. No, actually, I think it is. I would never let a publisher, an editor or a publisher push me to do something I don't want again. And that was what really happened on the 3rd book, where when we diverged. And if knowing what I know now, first off, my agent would stop it, right? I don't even have to do it. I can say to my agent, this isn't working, you step in. And secondly, I wouldn't let it happen, right? I wouldn't put a book out where I felt like this is not the book I wanted to put out. And so that's new, right? That's a new thing. And that is partly experience, but it is also confidence in me saying, you know what, I'm not going to do this. And I know you want the book, and, you know, I can stand up for myself. So that's, I would say absolutely that's about confidence. It's about both having the agent there to do it, but also I wouldn't let it happen again. So
and
that
then
was new.
oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut
No,
you
I was
off.
just saying that was new. Yeah.
And how do you find that line? And now you work on both sides because you
Mhm.
work as an editor with authors and then you're working as an
Yeah.
author with editors. How do you find that line of when is this the thing to push back on and when is
Right.
this a okay, it might have not been what I would do, but that really is the right choice
Yeah.
because of the publishing industry or whatever other factors? How do you kind of, what do you listen? What do you listen to? What part of
Yeah,
your like,
that's such a great question, and it is so complex. And I'm going to answer it from sort of multiple perspectives. First off, as an author, I am really flexible. In part, I think because of my theater background, right? Andrew, you and I both know when you're in a rehearsal process, the director is making suggestions and other actors are making suggestions, and the designers come in and go, hey, we could, and so that is my origins as a writer. And so I'm super flexible. I love to work with editors, and I'm fully aware that their suggestions most of the time are going to make the work better. So I think the things where I'm going to put my foot down and have in the past and I'm better at now is, does it fundamentally change the story? Right? If it's an argument about a word or a phrase or a order of something, that's one thing where I'm going to be more likely to accept or defer. If it's going to fundamentally change a character, change the plot, like I said in that third book, I had to cut a whole subplot, which made me unhappy. That's something I'm going to push back on, right? If it's for myself as a writer. When I work with other writers as a developmental editor, I'm going to tell them, I wouldn't do this. Here's why. Or have you thought about this? Or here are the repercussions. But it's the author's choice because I am not a publisher, right? Publishers play a different role. Okay. So I am a freelance developmental editor where I'm going to help a writer make the strongest choices that they can, but it is their project and for them to take out to an agent or to a publisher. If I was a publisher, I might hold a stronger line on certain kinds of things, right? But I think that for a publisher, the things that they should be looking at is, one, are you inadvertently insulting a group of people? Right? Are you inadvertently creating a problem for, race, ethnicity, gender, those kinds of biases? And that's something that an author could do unknowingly.
yeah, it happens.
Yeah, it happens. And so if a publisher came back and said, we can't use this word, we can't use this phrase, I'm going to give you guys an example. That's something I'm going to pay a lot of attention to. And I think as a publisher, they have the right to stop something that for them is fundamentally going to, because remember, once the publisher starts putting it out, it's their name on it too. It's your work, but it's their name on it too. So I'm going to give you an example of something that actually my agent and I changed. Some of you may have heard this before, but there's a moment in A Cold World where this isn't going to give anything away. My sheriff put her knee on a guy she'd just taken down. She put her knee on his back. She's white, he's white. But I had written that before the George Floyd, all that stuff had come out, like a week before. And I sent it to my agent and she read it. She came back and said, we can't do this anymore. You cannot have your good guy, police officer, put a knee on the back of a suspect. And it may even be different today, right? But at that moment, that was something we couldn't do. I wasn't going to argue that at all. Like, one, she didn't have to. It was totally fine for her to do something different in that moment. But that's one of those things where an outside eye, especially a publisher, if they came back and said, we can't do this, I'm not going to argue on that at all. So that was a very long, rambling answer to say, as an author, I'm going to protect my voice, my characters, my plot. As a freelance developmental editor, I'm going to show the writer what I think works best and why, and leave it to them to make those decisions. And if I was a publisher, I would draw a line in the sand for anything that I felt crossed a line unnecessarily, unwittingly, unknowingly, into something that was going to be problematic socially. Yeah. Did that answer the question? It was kind of long.
Absolutely. And then some. It was great. It was great. And I'm gonna pivot back a little bit more to Eddie herself. I
Yeah.
feel like we must have had this conversation, but I don't remember the answer. So, and I'm sure other people might want to know what inspired the idea for.
My beloved, I love Eddie. I do. I really love Eddie. So it's a couple of things. The first was the name itself came from my husband and I were on a road trip. and an Eddie Money song came on.
Okay.
And I can't remember how Shoes came up, but it was, we were joking around about Eddie Money, and somehow Eddie Shoes was said. I think my husband said it, and I said, that's a great name for a private eye. I thought Eddie Shoes is a great name for a private eye. And that's where the book started. It started with her name. So then I would say it's about my influences. And my biggest influences writing a private eye series was Sue Grafton's A is for Alibi, B is for Burglar, Kinsey Millhone series, right? For those who've read Sue Grafton. I like to say I honor Sue. I don't steal from Sue. I honor Sue. And the Rockford Files, because as a kid, I watched the Rockford Files with my granny. And so I always say that Eddie Shoes is the love child of Kinsey Millhone and James Rockford, right? And there's a wonderful relationship that happens in the Rockford Files between James Rockford and his dad, Rocky. And not what I wasn't really conscious of it, but I realized after I was writing it, I've never seen a mother-daughter crime fighting duo private eye series. Maybe it's out there, but I've never seen it. And how fun to, and then make the mom the wild card, right? Eddie Shoes is a little more follow the rules, and it's her mom who is the wild card. And so that's how Eddie evolved. So it started with her name, and then it went to how I think of a private eye series where it's lighter, it's funnier, but there's real heart there, and there's real social issues that get looked at, but it's done in a fun and lighthearted. And I have to add, I got to tell Sue Grafton before she died. I met her and I said to her, and this was early on, and I said, I have this series coming out, and I just want you to know how much you meant to me. And I got to tell her that before she died, so that was pretty cool.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And it makes sense to hear that it started with something like a name, because it's such a character driven, character focused work. I mean, it's driven by a lot of plot because it is of the nature of the book, but it's so she's at the heart of it. So that makes sense. It started with her like that. So when I interviewed you way back, I think it was 2-3 years ago at this point, I was looking at my notes. I asked you sort of how Eddie, if there's any of you in Eddie, because I see you in
Eddie. You've known me a long time.
So a little bit of a different note, and please feel free to.
Oops, we got somebody
unmuted.
Got it.
We're good now. Thank you. And feel free to take a pass on this one. But I'm wondering if there's any of your mother in Shava, or in your relationship with her and Eddie's relationship with Shava. And free to pass on that, because I know.
No, I'm happy to talk about that question. And as some of you know, my mom is pretty great, and we are the best of friends and have been for a very long time. My mom has been my confidant, right, and my North Star for most of certainly my adult life. Teenage years were a little rocky, but my adult life. The way, right, Terry says I can relate to that. Yep. The way I see my mom and I playing out in the dynamic is the way they feel about each other. The reality is both Eddie and Chava are me, right? They're both a lot of me in a lot of ways. And obviously, every fictional character, you're making stuff up. I probably wouldn't do all the crazy things that Chava gets herself into. But the kind of the humor and the sarcasm and the way that they are the two sides in me, right? Eddie is my practical side, and Chava is my wilder side. But the fact that they truly love each other, and as adults have come back to try to understand each other as people, is where I see my relationship with my mom reflected. So it's that dynamic. Yeah, people often say, "Is your mom as wacky as Eddie's mom?" And I'm like, no. My mother would never be a card counting poker player from Vegas. Not in her wheelhouse. But the relationship.
But had to ask.
Yeah. I once got her to drink a shot of tequila, and that's about as far as mom and I have ever gotten towards that.
What are some of your favorite things about Eddie?
Oh, what a great question. Wow, that's a great question. Nobody's ever asked me that.
Oh, good. Yay.
Yeah. I love her. I love her bravery. Like I'm a pretty brave person. So it isn't that that's not me, but she stands up for herself in a way that I don't always do. Right? So part of the bravery, like I might run into a burning building, but I might not stand up to someone who's being mean to me. Eddie's going to stand up to someone being mean to her. And I respect that. Like I wish that I was better at that myself. I'm really good at standing up for other people. I'm not great at standing up for myself. And it's taken me 5 years to figure out that you got to do that. So that's one thing I really love about her. And then I also love that she's so fully herself. She does accept help from her mom, but that's partly because her mom gets her into trouble, right? Her mom puts her in these situations, but she's very capable on her own, which, as you know, I share that with her too. But again, I love how she's very solid in herself. I think that's what I love best about her. She's like me without any insecurities.
And isn't that sometimes how we write characters is we
Yeah.
can let them do things that we wish
Yeah.
we could do.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then conversely, Miss Eddie, I'm sorry in advance. Is there anything about Eddie that drives you crazy or makes you just want to yell?
Oh, yeah. Let's see here. What about her makes me crazy? Oh,
We get you
well,
to talk about your mom and what you don't like about your characters. That's what we're
yeah. Yeah. She could ask for help a little more, right? Um, I think I'm gonna have to think about that. What do I not like about her? Because there's so I'm gonna have to think about that a little more because I'm sure there is something.
She's very likable, so it's not was a maybe a little bit of a trick
No,
question.
no, no, no. I think it's a really interesting question because I like to think that there's conflict in there. So what is my conflict with the characters? Maybe I wish she was a little less follow the rules. Eddie's the one who's always worried about, oh, this crosses the line, or I can't do that. And I think maybe she should be a little less that way and embrace a little bit more about what's freeing for Shava.
Okay.
Chava. I have to say her name
Am I
correctly.
saying that wrong, Kava?
Well, it's actually Chava, but that's sort of hard to say. So
So I don't think I have any more questions where I have to say it. So I'll just let you say it. Um, so how has writing a private eye,
Mm,
or has that, not how, has that changed how you look at people and the world? Like, are you
mm,
noticing things when you're out that you wouldn't have before? Are you more
mm.
skeptical of people, or was that something that was there before? And
Huh, another very interesting question. Here's what I think is true. And I see some other of my fellow crime writers out there, so I'll be curious if they feel the same way. I have this tendency to assume that I know things I probably don't, right? Like I'm always like, I know what the law is here, and I know how this investigation is going on, and I know why the police are, and maybe I know and maybe I don't. And so I would say that what's so interesting is I kind of go out in the world as if I am a private eye, as if I am inside on a police investigation. We'll be watching
tell
show
me
on
more.
TV. We're watching a show on TV and I'll be like, that's not how that would happen in the real world. That, they would do this, that, and this. And you can't get a warrant that fast. And you can't just check a cell phone without a warrant, and I'm sort of rattling off this stuff. And the reality, of course, is, yeah, I do a lot of research, but I'm not an expert. So I would say that's what's really different. And the more I know, the more I probably have a confidence that's not born out of any kind of reality. Although I will say, so I have a cop that I run everything past, and I have come into him with some stuff where he'll look at me and go, "You've gotten really good at this." So, I do have some skills, but I would say I'm not as good as I think I am in terms of understanding actual police procedure and
So I
things
will
like that.
not go to you for legal advice should I find myself in
No, you
trouble.
should, but you should take it with a grain of salt.
Um, but great. She's wonderful to consult with on the writing elements of that, I should say. Um, uh, so we are here to celebrate Eddie primarily, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention, well, we already mentioned your bio, but that you have another launch coming up in August for the
Yeah,
second book in your Sheriff Bet Rivers mystery series.
yeah,
Congratulations on that. This is a big
thanks.
year for you.
It is.
Um, how is it going with so many launches and so much happening in such a short time?
Yeah, right. It's interesting. You got to be careful what you ask for in this industry. Because I went from one book out, All We Buried being the only book out, to 5 books out, right, in 1 year. And it is a little complex for a variety of reasons. So I'll tell the story of A Cold, Cold World. Because like the Eddie Shoes, I was headed towards that book never coming out. All We Buried, as some of you know, launched in April of 2020, hands down the worst time to launch a book because of where it fell in the pandemic. What it meant was coming out in April, it meant that the hard books had already been printed, right? Because lockdown in March 14th, they had already been printed before lockdown. But bookstores closed, libraries closed, all of the typical places where hardback books go were not available. So my hardbacks didn't sell very well. What a lot of people don't realize is that in traditional publishing, it's the first 8 weeks is the strongest sales point for most books, right? So I didn't lose my first 8 weeks. I lost my first year and a half on that particular book. So I sold extremely well in ebook and audio, but hardbacks didn't sell. And my publisher dropped me. And they dropped a lot of us who launched in kind of late March, April, May, June. We all got dropped because of the hard books not selling. So even though I earned out my advance and made the money, they were left with these hardbacks. Because by the time things reopened, it was no longer a new book. So it wasn't as attractive. So that was a real, the COVID lockdown did in a lot of authors on that. So similar to publishers not picking up a pre-published or a group that's already been published, they also don't like picking up a second book in a series, right? That's a tough sell. So we had this book, and ironically, my publisher of All We Buried even said, "Well, we like this even better. It's a better book, but here's why we're not going to take it out." And so my agent and I are sitting here with this book that we both felt really positive about, but not sure where to take it. So similarly to Finding Open Road, we kind of sat on it for a while and looked at different options. And there's a publishing house called Severn House, which is out of the UK, but their primary market is US libraries. That's where they really like to put their books. So they do come out in hardback first. And they pick up series. And it's really interesting if you look through their catalog. I know half a dozen authors who got killed during COVID, and their series got picked up. Oh, fantastic! Someone just got the book on Amazon. Got the hardback. And so we went to them, and they loved the book and accepted it, and it's coming out with them, and they have been just fantastic to work with. So I'm thrilled to have that. Oh my gosh, one of my words just got rewritten as profanity in our.
Oh, you're watching. I don't have the.
Yeah, I don't know what they heard, but it wasn't the word that came
We
out
can
on
go
our
back and
closed
edit that.
caption. Yeah. Well, I was like, whoa, and I've been so clean here. So anyways, that's how that book came out. Oh, and so to go to your original question, right, which I've bypassed, it's a lot to try to think about what am I promoting today? Am I promoting the Eddie books? Am I promoting All We Buried? Am I promoting A Cold, Cold World? And the answer is I'm doing a lot for all of them. And it is a little, I feel a little discombobulated about what to support and what not to support. But I also find that they work really well together. I'll put out when one of the Eddie books is on sale on Amazon, and I'll put that out. And then, oh, we have a cover reveal for Cold Gold World. I put that out. Oh, it's available for pre-sales. And so it kind of flows along based on sort of what's happening with any of the books at any given time.
And I bet you have a lot of crossover readers between the two anyway, even though they're slightly
different.
kind of.
Yeah, I do. And part of that, I have cozy reader friends who like the Eddie books. And I love this. One of my cozy reader friends said, all we buried was as tense as I could handle. Right. So it was right on the edge for her. But my people who read my police procedurals, right, which are darker, which are a little tenser, and A Cold World moves pretty fast. It's not a thriller, but it has a little bit more of that sort of aspects to it. Those readers can say, hey, I'm kind of looking for a lighter read, and Nettie Shoes is still in that world of crime fiction. So I do have a lot of crossover. It's like a big Venn diagram, right? There's my books and my readers.
And you just got a compliment for Cold World.
Oh, thank you, Jim. Jim's one of the people that have read an arc, read an early advance, and gave me a wonderful, wonderful blurb. I thank you for that, and I'm so pleased he liked the book. And the blurb is on the books, printed in the book. So yeah, I know, yay, right?
Fantastic.
I love it.
Uh, so the mysteries, I had a question, excuse me, that makes no sense to me now. That's why I'm going like this. I had to re-gear. We'll just forget that one. Mysteries in particular, I mean, a lot of genres, but I would say in particular, that's one of the ones that or controlling the flow of information or the delivery of information is so important, right?
Yeah.
What your protagonist knows and when, what does your reader know and when, and what do readers need to know at all and what can be left unsaid, all of that.
Yeah.
How, regardless of the genre that they write in, I think that's an area that, we as editors, or at least me, I'll speak for myself, see a lot of writers struggle with,
Yeah.
not front loading everything or not holding back too much. How do you approach those decisions, especially because you're writing in a genre where that's so paramount?
It is so important. Yeah, man, that is so hard. That is so hard. And and I don't know whether this is I worked in the theater and was a playwright because I'm a character driven person, or if I became one because I did that. I don't know which came first, but I approach my mysteries in the same way. In other words, creating characters and making them complex and interesting is way easier for me than plot. Simultaneously, mysteries, it's incredibly important to have things plotted really well and really tight. And so that's where I end up having to spend so much of my time. So I would say a couple of things happen. One is if you understand the arc of your story, right? Where an event prompts an event, prompts an event, prompts an event to a climax. If you really understand that arc, you almost don't have to think about what information to provide when, because you're going to know, well, I can't start off with a bunch of exposition because that's not a strong opening. So you're not going to do that, right? And then you're not going to drop the most important thing in the first scene because that's what you're building to. So I would say that what makes my plots work the best is my fundamental understanding of story structure and an ability to go back in and say, oh, this is too much exposition. I need to cut some of this out. Or to go back in and say, oh, I need to drop a hint here. Because if I look at the structure, there's a hole where a reader couldn't see how this happens, right? And so I fall back, I think, on structure and understanding that that ability to go, okay, I know what foreshadowing is. Do I have it here? Do I have it here? Do I have it here? I understanding what rising action is. Is this scene more important, than the one that came before? And if the answer is no, okay, I've got to move some stuff around, or I need to add, more importantly, probably I need to add something to build onto that. So I think that the understanding structure is how I deal with that. It's it's also helps to have great beta readers who say to you, I couldn't follow this. The fine line for mysteries is the reader should not be ahead of you, right? You want them either with you or slightly trailing. But when they get to the solution to the puzzle, they should be able to say, oh, all the clues were there and I missed it. Right? If you don't do that, they feel tricked. And if they're way ahead of you, they're bored. So that's really that fine line. And I'm going to say it's story structure that gets me through, understanding story structure. Yeah.
And I mean, I have my own answer for this. I'm curious your thoughts. So you feel that a lot of those elements are things that like that does it, is there that aha moment? You may not be able to see yourself, or it's harder to see yourself, or you just want that outside kind of.
Yeah, I think that, the one thing a writer can never do is not know everything that's not on the page. You always know what's in your head, right? You always know what you think is driving characters or their backstory or all this other stuff. You can't always see that didn't make it to the page, right? And I've had times where I've sent my book out to a beta reader or my agent or whatever, and they'd come back and go, how did they know this? Like even this, so Cold World, it's been through multiple rewrites, it's been through beta readers, it's been through my agent, all of these things. And my developmental editor with my publisher came back to me and goes, what was the motivation for this character? It's nowhere in here. And I went, oh yeah, it hasn't. None of us saw that, right? None of us saw that. And it was an easy fix at the end of the book, but it was missed by me and a bunch of really good beta readers. And so I knew what was driving them. I thought it was on the page. It got missed, but this professional eye said, hey, wait a minute. We have a problem here. Now, part of why I would say the developmental editor, in addition to being good at her job, part of why she saw it and we didn't is when you're fixing stuff, right? You're going to miss stuff. So you do a rewrite, you fixed a whole bunch of things, but now there's 12 things left to see, right? Somebody's going to read it and catch 8. And somebody's going to read it again and catch 2. Somebody's going to read it again and catch, hey, there's the motivation for these characters is not on the page. So it's that process of eliminating all of the problems, which I think sometimes requires an outside eye.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you didn't write mysteries, what genre do you think you would write? I have my own guesses, but I want to hear what you said.
Historical fiction.
That was my guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Projects of yours that.
Yep. Yeah. And I actually, it's funny that you mentioned that. I don't usually talk about projects that are unfinished, but I have a historical novel that I wrote 15 years ago. And I've always loved it. And it had gotten some attention. I had a guy at Random House who really loved it, but he was like, I don't edit this genre, but it's really great. He gave me suggestions and I loved the book. And then Eddie came out and, my other series, and I was writing mysteries. And I finally went to my agent a couple of months ago and I said, I got this book. It's historical, now she does rep historical. So that's good. But I said, what do you think? And she goes, let's give it a try. Finish it up, send it over. Can't hurt. We'll send it out. And she's a wonderful agent and also like willing to try things, obviously, or my Eddie books wouldn't be out. My, Cold World wouldn't be back out. And so I love the willingness on her part to be like, sure, let's just see what happens. So it's not done. I had to put it on the back burner because a Cold World, when it got picked up, and I had stuff to do with that. I, in fact, sent off final proof this morning. So okay. I can get back to my historical. But I think I'd write sweeping historical fiction. That would be my thing. I love that you knew that.
Well, because I think I read this. I think I read it.
I think you did like 15 years ago.
I'm excited to hear that. I'm excited to be back. So yes, that's probably why that was my guess. And this is, I guess, this next question is apt because it kind of talks about something that really intersects with those two genres, and that's research. And I want to know kind of what your research project looks like, and what does that process look like? When do you bring in experts? How do you? Because I know particularly for your police procedurals, that's a heavy part of what you do.
Yeah. And the funny thing was, I did research on what it is to be a private detective in Washington State in terms of, like, I looked up what your accreditation is and rules you have to follow and things like that. But it was much I did much less research on that aspect, and I did a lot more on police procedural. And the reason for that was I just wanted Eddie to know what her rules were. Everything else I was sort of like, I can be flexible on. I just want to know what rules she has to follow. And I did touch base with a few private detectives here in Washington State with a couple of questions. But what I really felt like I needed to get correct was police procedural, in part because Eddie's not a cop. There's other, her romantic interest, Chance Parker, is a police officer, and I needed him to behave correctly because I wanted him to be a good cop. And so I felt like it sounds sort of counterintuitive where she's my main character, but I had less interest in sort of interviewing. Now I've read I read a lot of nonfiction, I should say. I read nonfiction about being a private investigator. But it was the police stuff. So with that first book, with One Dead, Two to Go, I walked into the Issaquah. I was living in Seattle area at the time. I walked into the Issaquah Police Department and I said, I'm a novelist and I want to run some stuff past the detective. And the receptionist said, well, I'll check in with everybody here and see if somebody wants to talk to you. And I almost immediately got a response back from Diego Zanella.
Oh, that's a character name.
He's Italian and handsome and wonderful. And she said, Diego's willing to talk to you. So I sent him a note and we met. And I walk in with a book, right? The printed manuscript with post-it notes on every single question. And he just was fantastic. And I asked him why he was willing to do it. Well, it turns out his niece is a novelist and he has tremendous respect and wanted to help me out. His niece is back in Italy. And we now have let's see here. I met him in 2015. We have an almost 10-year history. I've worked with him on every single book. He is great at telling me not just what I've done wrong or could change, but he'll make suggestions. Like, well, have you thought about, this? And he's also super honest about, some of the internal things that happen, which was really, really useful with the Sheriff Bet Rivers mysteries, where I'm inside a police officer. So it depends on book to book. The third book has firefighters in it, and I got to hang out with firefighters. In fact, Diego introduced me to the chief of the Issaquah Fire Department, and I went on ride-alongs. I got to ride in the truck and I hung out with them with wildfire training and spent time with them. I've interviewed healthcare professionals in terms of emergency medicine. So my big thing is, the way I do it is I write the book with my best guesses. I flag all the stuff I'm not an expert in. I find an expert and I interview them with regards to those specific things. I read a lot, I read nonfiction. I love watching, true stories on, forensic files and FBI and police stuff to watch, real documentaries. But I love to talk to people who are experts. Yeah. And my husband, there's something that shows up in book 3 that required somebody in the energy industry. And so my husband has been tapped a few times for, so if I did this, what would happen?
We all have a few experts in our life.
Yes.
Them. Yeah. What part of writing a book do you find most challenging? And also, what part do you find most enjoyable?
Oh, writing a first draft. Hands down the hardest thing you have to do. Writing a first draft, hands down the hardest. But also in my probably rewrites is my favorite part. I love when you have a first draft and you're like, yes, this will work. It's not ready to publish. It's not ready for anyone to read, but it will work. It's here. You know what I'm going to say. The structure is there, right? It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But yeah, so that's absolutely the hardest part, because you have those moments of, I don't know what happens next. I don't know what these characters are doing. I don't know if this is going to work. Why would anyone want to read this, right? Like, what if I get myself in a hole and I can't get myself out, right? Who really is who is the killer? My second Eddie book, I wrote a first draft and realized I didn't have the right person committing a crime. So getting that first draft down is really, really hard. And so for writers out there, if you've gotten a first draft, wow, that's huge, right? I love the rewriting because you have the freedom to continue playing and exploring and making things better, but you're doing it knowing it's going to be okay. Yeah.
Okay. I
Yeah.
mean, that's interesting. That's interesting. I'm not sure that same is true for me. So it's interesting how we all.
What would you, what's your, let me hear yours.
Oh, I
What?
think the first draft is most exciting because there's all the possibility. There's all the possibility.
So that's so terrifying. What if this doesn't work?
Well, at that point, you don't know that it won't, though. Right?
True, true, true.
Um, what is one of the most valuable pieces of advice about writing that you've ever received? I know you've given much advice to people, but I'm sure you've received some. What has that?
I have, and I will tell you, some of you may have heard this story, but I wrote my very first novel, my 120,000 word mystery. I had been a playwright and I wasn't sure. I thought, well, I hope it's long enough, my 120,000 word mystery. So I was at a writer's conference. This was a long time ago. I was at a writer's conference and I happened to strike up a conversation with an editor, a developmental editor, freelance developmental editor. And I was telling her about my project and I said, I don't know what to do next. And we talked about it. And she said, oh, it sounds really interesting. She says, how long is it? And I said, 120,000 words. She said, cut 50,000 words and then let's work together. She hadn't read it. She said, cut 50,000 words and then let's work together. And I went, okay. And I went back and I cut 50,000 words and I went, wow, this is so much better. So the reason I consider that like the greatest piece of advice, one is what she was really telling me is I needed to understand my genre. I needed to understand that the kind of mystery that I had written, 70,000 words was about right. And she didn't have to read the book to know that it was too long for the kind of book I was talking about. And so I had a moment of, oh, there's rules. Right? I'd been a playwright. I knew what those rules were. I didn't know what they were in fiction. And so it taught me, one, I need to understand the business side. I need to understand the rules of my genre. I need to understand why this tightened up the book so much, right? And I learned, oh yeah, I really need to work with a professional, especially for my first book. Now that book got much better. I never sent it out. I never tried to publish it because I also knew by the end of working with her that she was a learning experience for me. It was all valuable. That book wasn't good enough. Right? That book wasn't going to make it. And that I needed to apply everything I learned with her. I'm so grateful to her. None of this was wasted time at all. Was not wasted time, was not wasted money. I took everything I learned from her and wrote my next book. Right? And then my next book. And then my next book. And I still hear her voice in my head. We're talking about 20 years, almost 20 years ago. I still hear her voice in my head. Yep.
Well, that's something we always say we try to do with allegory is help not make just this manuscript better, but your next one and your next one.
Yep. So yeah.
And we do have some questions coming in from audience people. I think I have a couple more I want to get to, and then this one's really relevant to Laurel asked about how hard must be to take out a subplot and how did you go about doing that?
Yeah, that was painful. Basically I'm not going to give anything away. I removed a romantic subplot and made it platonic, and it just didn't add anything to the book. Right. And that's why I was resentful, because as a romantic subplot, it added a lot to the book. To make it a platonic subplot didn't add anything. And so that was how I did it, and also why it didn't work. Yeah, great question, Laurel.
I'm really excited to hear that, to see that one.
I know, right?
Again, because I think I read some scenes when it was in there, and
then
it was gone, and
yep.
Um, can you tell us anything about what you're working on now? I mean, you gave some hints about what's kind of out there in
Yeah,
art.
I can. So yeah, I have two things that I'm working on. The first is that historical that I mentioned earlier. I am going to finish it up. I want my agent to, tell me if she feels like it's viable. We just to give you some, kind of how things can work with an agent. We got on the phone and I described the book to her, and it was a good hour plus conversation. And I talked her through the plot, and she said, "Okay, because this book is old, right? I wrote this like whatever 15 years ago." She said, "This won't work anymore. This won't work anymore. This won't work anymore. Rewrite that." And I agreed with her. We very rarely, I don't know that I've ever disagreed with her. We might frame things differently, but we're very much in alignment. And I said, "Okay, I get why that's problematic now. I'm gonna, she said, rewrite that, then send it to me." So that's back on the table now that the proofread for Cold World is done. So I have that, and then I would love for Severn House to pick up a third Sheriff Bet Rivers book. So I'm working on a first chapter and a synopsis, which is really hard. I think a synopsis is harder than writing a book. Like I'm almost like, oh, I should just write the whole thing, right? Because and then figure out what the synopsis is. Because I'm not an outliner. I don't think that way. I'm a very organic writer, and so it's hard for me. And so I'm working on that. um, to get that synopsis done, and a first chapter, which is what I would need to send to the publisher for them to either accept or not. So those are the two things that I'm working on now.
And then you have to write the book that matches the synopsis.
Yeah, but only if they say yes. Well, actually, that's a really funny thing. So the reality is, sort of, you sort of need to match it. What you need to do is produce a quality book that they like. So if you go off the synopsis, but it's still in the world, right, you're okay. What you don't want to do is go off the synopsis and have it be bad, right, or outside of what they might be expecting. So you have a little bit of leeway. Things might change a little bit, but they're going to be fine if you come back with a better book than your synopsis. They just won't be okay if you come back with one that doesn't work. But yes, then you have to suck it up and write the book.
And Sheila, you read my mind because this is my next question. Have we seen the last of Eddie's Shoes, or can readers hope for more?
Thank you for asking that. I do dearly love Eddie. So I have a partial fourth book. Which I have, I set aside when I realized I wasn't going to continue with my first publisher. And the reality with Open Road Media is they don't tend to buy new books. They've put out the books that are produced. But if Eddie sells really, really well, they would. So everybody, buy lots of Eddie books and get your friends buy Eddie books so that I have a road to a fourth Eddie book. Yeah, I hope so. I would like to write a fourth Eddie book.
And with this particular publisher, it sounds like buying it in digital is going to be one of their best ways to
It doesn't matter whether you want to buy ebook or or the physical books. Either one is totally fine. What I said about the publisher, to clarify, thank you for asking that. To clarify, they are an ebook first publisher. That's their goal, or their how they are most set up to promote. Does not mean that things don't come out in paperback, which obviously they do. It also, if the books sell well, this is backwards the way of most traditional publishing. If the book sells really well, it'll come out in hardback. You guys will all know how well I sell if it comes out in hardback. If it doesn't sell well, it doesn't come out in hardback. Now, traditionally, with traditional publishing, hardback comes out first. And that is because hardbacks typically earn the most money for a publisher. So most publishers, especially the older, more established, larger publishers, they always come out with hardback first because that's where they make a whole lot of money. And if you have good sales, then paperbacks come out. But those models are changing a little bit. Paper has gotten so expensive. Nobody wants to store books. Things have moved to, print on demand. And so publishers that are what we call ebook first publishers, right? They do print books, but it's ebook first. It's just a new model. And what's interesting about ebook readers is that if ebook readers love a book, they go and buy the physical copy as well. So one of the Open Road Media's marketing strategies is sell the ebook really well first, and then those readers are going to also come out and buy physical books. I can't remember what the original question was, but I find that part of
it was about Eddie, and it was
oh yes, fourth book.
Well, I kind of derailed you. And I see we have some questions, and we have a little bit of time, but there's one more question I have to ask you, and then we'll see if we can get to some audience questions. I made a soft promise on Facebook that we would talk about horses, which I know you're always down for, but I'm not going to diverge too much. Do you see any parallels between the process of caring for horses and for riding?
Yep, I sure do.
Tell
all
me
the time. All the time. One of my favorite expressions in what's called natural horsemanship, which is part of what I practice, is when you're working with a horse, it takes as long as it takes. And it's such an important concept, both for training horses and writing. It takes as long as it takes. You can't rush to publication. You can't rush to the query process. If you have a horse who's anxious to canter, right? Well, then you're working on a walk and you're working on a trot, and then you're getting him up to feeling confident at a canter. You can't rush that process. Forcing your horse to canter is going to get him unhappy and you hurt, right? Or whatever you're doing with your horse. So, and I also see a lot of, another thing we talk about with training is if you don't have a foundation, you can't move forward. You can't get your horse doing fancy dressage moves when they're not confident under saddle, when they don't trust you to protect them, when they are fearful of being away from other horses. And so if you don't have a good foundation, you can't put a polish on it. Well, it's the same with writing. If your structure doesn't work, if your character development doesn't work, if you don't have a story arc, you don't need to proofread, right? Proofreading a book that doesn't have a strong structure is a waste of your time. Trying to get a horse to, have that really pretty prance as they go around a dressage ring. Well, you can't do that if your horse doesn't understand how to transition between gaits. And so I see so much parallel. And when you're with a horse, you can't be thinking about other things or you're going to get hurt, right? You got to pay attention. The only times I've ever gotten hurt, right, is when I stopped paying attention, right? I got kicked in the hand, which was really painful because I wasn't quite paying attention, and my horse was over here, and something caught my attention, and I turned like this, and he, kicked up, and I actually hit him. He didn't hit me; I hit him. And so that was one of those moments of right when you're writing, you have to be all in for that period of time, and the same with horses. So yeah, I see a ton of. But it takes as long as it takes. I often think that, working on that first draft takes as long as it takes.
And I've heard you say that a lot too. You've reminded me that a time or two.
Yeah.
We have, I'm going to turn to some audience questions because I want to make sure we get some of those. And how do you choose the name of your series?
I just went with the main character. So the Eddie Shoes mysteries, Eddie's the protagonist. Sheriff Bet Rivers mysteries. I think having the sheriff in there was important. So the Eddie Shoes mysteries, we don't know by that it's it's just the name of the character. But with Sheriff Bet Rivers, we know it's a police procedural. So I felt that my publisher and I both felt that was important to have that in. Good question.
And then one more question, and then we're almost at 11. Do you have any more books on writing craft? Writing craft. Writing?
Yes, I do. The next one, and it kind of got put on the back burner a little bit because of having 4 books out 1 year, right? Which got a little like, well, yeah, I got stuff to do. Is going to be on the rewriting process. A number of you have heard me talk about intentional rewriting and how I feel that do so much better if we approach our rewrites with an intention, right? We can get, and this is actually very horse related as well. You don't take your horse out to work on transitions and stops and jumping and all at once, right? You work on this and then you work on this and then you work on this, and that's, I think, the same with writing. If you approach a rewrite, especially you've done one draft and you have huge problems and you try to do it all at once, I think that's really problematic. So my next craft book is going to be on intentional rewrites and how to break it down, do one thing at a time and actually have it be much more productive than trying to do everything at once.
And Terry just gave a little plug for Elena's workshop on rewriting and self-editing coming up on, is that next week?
Wednesday. Yeah,
Wednesday. So check it out on allegoryediting.com if you want to register for that. And we are at 11. And I want to make sure to respect people's time on this sunny, well, here anyway, sunny Sunday. So thank you all so much for coming and joining us for this last hour. And thank you, Elena, to coming and chatting with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. Thank you all. It's fantastic to see everyone.
And where can people find you real quick? Where can they find you?
Oh, great. I'm on ElenaHartwell.com, ElenaTaylorAuthor.com. And with both of those, you can find me on social media as well. And sign up for my newsletter. I do lots of giveaways and things like that. So it would be great to have you there.
Your books are all the places, Amazon.
My books are all the places, Amazon and Barnes and Noble and IndieBound. And you can order them at your bookstores. They probably won't carry them, but they can order them. Yep. Thank you all.